Okay, welcome to everybody. My name's Julie. Some of you heard my talk about abortion, and that one I've given a few times, but this one is really the first time I've done this one because I think there's such a need in our society. And this one is about the dangers of pornography. And I'm going to give a little bit of history about myself, and because everything is like dominoes, right? Something that affects you early in your life, and it knocks another domino on down the way. And later on, years later, you say, well, how did I get to this place? Can everyone hear me? Okay. When I was a kid, and I still am, Hal would attest to this if he was here, I'm a book addict. I'm a book hoarder, really. That's my new title. I'm always collecting more and more because I love to read, and I loved to read as a child. I'd read everything I could get my hands on. Now, unfortunately, in the house I grew up in, which was, there were myself, 3 younger brothers, my dad was an ophthalmologist, a physician, and then my mother, and all of us in this house, in a generally happy home. But my dad had pornography. He had an addiction to it. And most of it was confined to one of the bedrooms that was supposedly his office. But even on the side table in their bedroom, there would be things like Playboy, Penthouse, and as the years went by, Hustler, because porn, like any other addiction, you require even more graphic things. And so, anyway, so I looked at all those things, and I thought that was something everybody's dad looked at. It was so normalized. Now, I will preface this by saying there was never any abuse of any kind, to my knowledge, that went on, nothing that happened with me. But one of the things that, and this is sort of hard for me to say, but one of the things that I remember doing as a little girl, like maybe 6 or 7, you take your bath and you're getting dressed, and I can remember, getting half pajamas on and kind of strutting in there and saying, I'm Playboy's Playmate of the Month. I mean, it's pretty horrifying to think of that, but I thought that was funny. I thought I was doing a funny thing. And I wish they would have taken the time to correct me on that and say that was not a funny thing to do. And of course, I outgrew that, but I would have friends sometimes spend the night, and then they would, maybe I must have mentioned that those kinds of magazines were out there because they would, can we look at some of your dad's magazines? Because they were curious. Kids are always curious. That's why that kind of stuff shouldn't even be in a house, but we'll talk about that later. So anyway, so that was sort of the background for things. So I had a perception. It was very common to me to think of women being extremely provocative to appear attractive to someone. And even though my mother didn't dress provocatively, that was obviously something that pleased my dad, was seeing those pictures. And so I had the beginnings of having a wrong self-image about that kind of thing. And porn is addictive, as we know, and people do require more and more levels of porn, usually, and that's exactly what he was doing. He started, at some point, I would notice that by their TV set there would be videos that you could tell by the title had something to do with pornography. I didn't watch any of those, but those things were in the house, and he had a whole wall of books in his office, and many of them had a very benign title. It didn't say Naked Ladies. It might have some title that didn't seem like it meant anything. And out of curiosity, I would look, and many of these books were actually reprints of antique pornography. Before there was even photography, people were drawing images of porn and selling books with it. I thought that was amazing. So, any case, all that stuff was in there. Those are all accessible to me and to my 3 brothers. But of course, it had an effect on the relationships I had, because I already had images in my mind of what must be normal. That, as Dad would say, well, sex is beautiful, and I love your mother. And so there was no talk about how you should save yourself for being married to somebody that you love. And so that, you imagine the natural progression of that as I became a young woman. I didn't feel like that was an important thing, so that was the way I behaved in relationships. And of course, relationships like that rarely work out. But I also believed that part of the lack of respect for the body made it easier for me to work in an abortion clinic. Because not only is unwanted pregnancy a natural sequelae of having random sex, but it also, if you don't respect someone's body and it's no longer the temple of the Holy Spirit, it's much easier to go in and have a procedure and to rip out the baby. So anyway, so all those things, and if you were here for my other talk, I ended up working later as a young nurse, had moved out to Boulder, broken up with someone, went to Boulder, Colorado, and there was an ad in the paper for a woman's health clinic, and it had great hours, daytime hours, which for a nurse is wonderful. And so I ended up being hired there and working for 2.5 years, and that was a clinic that to this day is still open. The doctor's in his 80s, and he is one of about 4 doctors in this country that still do very late abortions. And I will just reprise a little bit of it. He goes, when I was there, he would go to 24 weeks. But now in Colorado, the law's been extended to where they can go to term for any reason. So if someone just decides they don't want to be pregnant anymore, they can go to him, and it costs quite a bit of money, but he will do it. Anyway, but as those who watched my other speech know, God was working on my heart all that time, even though I'd sort of hardened my heart to what I was seeing, because nurses become good at that. When you see bad things, you have to build a little bit of a shell around yourself. Because I'd worked in ICU and trauma and things like that prior, and so you can keep working, you have to not let yourself get emotionally involved, which is what I was doing in the abortion clinic. I thought, well, she probably wouldn't be a good mother anyway. I would say stupid things in my head so that I could keep functioning. But God was working on my heart, and after 2 years, I decided I wanted to do something different. And so I applied for the job in Denver, which wasn't that far away, and it was a float pool job, which means each day you go to work, they're going to send you to any one of a certain number of areas, and it was Level 1 nursery, which is normal newborns, Level 2, which is newborns who are having a little bit of trouble, maybe a little bit early, and the Level 3 is the really tiny ones. And I absolutely love taking care of those little guys. And it's so ironic to think that I was, not long before that time, I was assisting this man to end their lives. So I really think God was finding a way to soften my heart. And so I was really falling in love with that job. Anyway, I joined the Wyoming Air National Guard as a flight nurse, and that is where I ended up meeting the love of my life, my husband of 30-something years. I'd have to sit and think for a minute. Our anniversary's in August. And he's a great guy, but I assumed I still had the mental state of someone who has been around porn. And I remember I gave him, there used to be a little small magazine the size of Reader's Digest called Penthouse Forum. It was stories, so it was written pornography, which is just as dangerous as looking at pictures. And I got him a copy one time. I thought he'd like it. I thought all men liked it. And I came home from work one day, and I found the remains of it on our wood stove. He'd thrown it in there and burned it. God love him. He didn't want that in the house. Isn't that awesome? So I was just so fortunate to meet that man. But I was surprised, and life goes on, and we ended up, after Desert Storm and all that, we both went over there. We came back and got pregnant with our first daughter, and that was absolutely the scales falling off my eyes. Having my own children just absolutely rocked my world, and I could not have been happier. I loved all of it. I was totally happy to be home with them and just be with them all the time. And so that, in another way, I think, was healing my heart too. But when the girls were getting older, I was very concerned because by this time I was aware of the negative effects of pornography, and I wanted to try to shield them somehow. Now today it's much harder for those of you with children, because not only has society tolerated more nudity in public, we also have phones, right? And anything can be found on there. Plus there's things on television during daytime hours, which there used to be laws about that. The television companies wouldn't do racy things before, 11 o'clock or something. And now that stuff's on all the time, so parents have to be so careful. And when our girls were getting bigger, I started talking early about how precious their body was to the Lord, and that they needed to respect it, and that there would be people who tried to tell them otherwise, but that the sanctity of their own body, it was a gift from God, and that they didn't have to give away their body to anybody, to please anybody. I didn't tell them about my past. Some people are more comfortable with using that as part of their story to their kids, but I felt like, growing up as I did, that when I saw an adult doing something that an adult I respected, then I thought it must be okay regardless of what they said. So I thought, if I say to them, here's what Mom did, then they might be in the situation where they encountered it and thought, well, Mom saw it and she turned out okay. So I didn't even discuss my past with pornography until they were adults. I just said, it's disrespectful to you and it's disrespectful to God. So stay away from it. And all girls, I think, want to look pretty when they go to church or any place else, want to wear that new dress, and sometimes that dress was too short. And the way I chose to handle it was to say, go talk to Dad and see what he thinks about that dress. And invariably, Dad would say, you need to go change. Because it was and is such an important part of their lives. Fathers are crucial to a young woman learning the dignity of her own person. And I didn't get that from my dad. I think he loved me, but I don't think he either didn't know or didn't care that what he was leaving in the house was very damaging. And I didn't want that to happen. I wanted them to want to please him in the way they dressed properly. So anyway, we would have those conversations, and later we had to dial up. You youngsters probably don't know what that is, but used to get on the internet, had to go through your phone line and make all those funny noises it made, and suddenly you'd be connected to America Online. And so there was no chance of playing games on the computer at our house because it was so slow. Well, when we visited my parents, who by then lived in Oklahoma City, 2 hours from us, they had high speed, and they wanted to play a video game. But because my dad still had his addiction, still had his office, the house they bought in Oklahoma City was the computer room and the so-called library, I would send my husband in first and say, you check the computer and see if there are any windows that have anything wrong on them before they play a game. And he'd always have to delete pages because he was bringing up pages, and the woman on there would look like she was maybe not even of legal age. I mean, there were no child porn pictures per se, but I'd look at them and think, that girl's probably 17, 18. It was just so dreadful to think these girls had nobody to tell them that they didn't need to do that to be valuable. So anyway, it was quite a bit later till we discussed those issues with the kids as they got into their teens, and I did share some of it with them and about how it is a terrible addiction. And finally, they needed to leave that house because both of them were getting so elderly, and our job was packing up because we moved them into a double-wide trailer on our property. And so I told my husband, I alone am going to pack up his books because I'm going to open every single one, and all the porn is going into a black contractor bag because I don't even want the trash man seeing what's in there. So that's what I did. I mean, we're talking shelves and shelves, and I opened every single one. Some of them looked very innocent. I mean, he loved nature and bird watching. He had, there were innocent books there too, but some of the books had a very benign title, didn't look like anything. And that's why you have to be careful too, by the way, with Goodwills and things. Because I saw a copy of one of them he had in a Goodwill. And it was written porn, but it was hardcore. And I actually took it off the shelf and threw it behind the bookcase so no one could see it. But yeah, I opened every one of them. And the ones, I mean, there were drawings of pornography from when they didn't have cameras. These were reproduction books of ancient porn. So anyway, so he passed away a couple years ago, and this was a person that was so well respected by everyone on the outside. Nobody knew his secret. He loved opera, all kinds of classical music, radios. He had a ham radio, but my vision of him, unfortunately, my memory of him is that habit he had. It's like a beautiful garment you have and it gets a stain on it, and then no matter what you try to do, you can't get it out. So I wish I could have really good memories of my dad. I know he wasn't all bad, and the chances are that someone may have molested him as a child to send him on that path. Because I have read that is something commonly that will trigger inappropriate behavior, is being molested. So little children simply cannot be left alone with somebody you don't absolutely trust. Because people can be like my dad. He had legions of people who said they were so thankful to him for his eye surgery and what he'd done for them. And in many ways he was, a nice person. But that was this horrible, horrible flaw that he had. So that's one reason I wanted to give this talk, was just as a reminder for people with young kids or grandkids that you cannot be too careful about this, because it is everywhere. It's so easy for them to see it. But we equally need to fill up their battery pack inside with the knowledge that they should not think of someone else's body in that way, as garbage. And that they should never have to accept any sort of inappropriate behavior from anyone else. And that's awfully hard, especially when a kid gets close to puberty and is fascinated with the opposite sex. But remember that it can happen to girls too. That's a dark spot of my memory, between that and the clinic. And I honestly believe the pornography helped lead me to that. But anyway, so I try my best to forgive my dad, and I tell this story in hopes of helping others.